Good evening. It is our great pleasure that along with the celebration of 100 years of geography in India and the IIG and the Department of Geography Northeastern Film Industry is going to celebrate the birth centenary of Professor Moonis Raza. In the last IIG conference, 44th IIG conference, which was held in Bottom University, Guwahati, it was decided that since it is synchronous, it means that the 100 years of geography in India as well as the birth centenary of Professor Moonis Raza. So that is why we have decided in that meeting that we would celebrate this birth centenary on the occasion of 100 years of geography of India. And accordingly, today in the evening, we had decided to hold it in 5:45, but because of the technical sessions going on, that is why we are starting it now. Professor Moonis Raza was one of the chief architects in the academic planning of the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and the founding chairperson of the Center for Study of Regional Development, JNU. He was also the Vice Chancellor of Delhi University and the Director of the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration. So we are honored to hold this birth centenary celebration of Professor Moonis Raza. To chair this Professor Moonis Raza birth centenary celebration, I will invite Professor Harjit Singh Ji to please come on the dais. We have 5 honorable speakers. May I request Professor D.K. Naik to please come on the dais. May I request Professor Abdul Shaban, please come on the dais. Professor Ram Bhagat Singh. Professor Sarfraz Alam will join online. He told us accordingly. He is already there. Okay. And I will request the last but not the least, Professor Shachidanand Sinha, to come on the dais. We welcome all of the dignitaries on the dais and the chairman. Now it is the time to hand over the mic to the chairman, Professor Harjit Singh.
Thank you, Professor. You know, it's not only a great honor for me to be part of centenary celebration of a person whom I always consider to be my mentor. And I will very briefly tell you about Professor Moonis Raza. Professor Moonis Raza was born on 2nd February 1925, and unfortunately he died very early. He died on 19th July 1994 at the age of 69. Coming February, 2nd February, he would have been 100 years old. That's why we are celebrating his centenary. He was born in Gazipur in Uttar Pradesh in a very interesting family. His father was a advocate, and many members of his family were very creative. He was the eldest son, and his younger brother was Rahim Masoom Raza. Most of you have heard his name, who had written the lyrics of Mahabharata. And his another brother was Professor of Geography, so he was Mahdi Raza. Then the youngest one settled down in USA. We used to call, fondly used to call him Nawab, the youngest one. So Raza started his career. You see, in order to understand Professor Moonis Raza, we cannot only define him and look at him in the narrow perspective of geography. He was a larger than life personality with many dimensions in life. As a student, he was an activist of Student Federation. That time there was only one communist party in the country, and he became a president of Student Federation during his student days, and he used to tell me jokingly, he said, look, I am more important than Indira Gandhi. When I was the president of Student Federation, Indira Gandhi was an ordinary member of Student Federation. And then after completing his master's in geography from IIG Muslim University, he joined Department of General Education. He gave a new direction to the whole idea of teaching education. And from there, after teaching there for a few years, he went to Srinagar, Kashmir, as head of the humanities in Regional Engineering College, Srinagar. After a few years, he became Dean of Humanities in Regional Engineering College, Srinagar. And then subsequently, he became Principal of Regional Engineering College. And after serving as Principal for about 4 or 5 years, that was the time when Indian Parliament was debating the idea of having some kind of innovation in education system in India. Under that, they decided to set up a new university. And that university, they did not want to be on the pattern of already existing universities. So this debate was there in the Parliament. And then it was decided that let's call the leading minds of the country, let them think and visualize how a different university should be, what it should be like. And those people, they sat down, and they wrote concept papers. That and the structure of Jawaharlal University was very different. It was interdisciplinary university, largely residential university, and there were no departments. There were schools, broad schools, and the schools, some of the schools, there were centers. For example, all of us who have been associated with, GNU, we call ourselves geographers, and have studied in GNU, but GNU never had a department of geography. GNU had a center for the study of regional development, where there were geographers, economists, demographers, statisticians, and geologists working together. And this idea was Professor Moonis Raza's idea, because he wanted to give a greater respectability to geography as a spatial science. And I can say with a lot of pride that it was in CSRD that geographer taught economists and demographers how to draw a map and how to interpret a map with a regional perspective. This was the contribution. And after, from Srinagar, when GNU came into existence, Professor Raza was invited. First Vice Chancellor was appointed in 1969. His name was Mr. G. Parthasarthi, and he was also a very learned person, diplomat, and he had wrote a lot of role to play in the planning and other things. And when he came as a Vice Chancellor, he appointed an officer on special duty planning. And Professor Raza came to Delhi as officer on special duty as planning. And then he was given the rank of professor also. And from there he conceived of setting up the Center for the Study of Regional Development. Then he taught in Center for the Study of Regional Development. I am very proud of the fact that I was his first PhD. I did under him. And there are a lot of other, many scholars who are much brighter than me and very important scholars who completed research work under him. And another interesting thing is that the PhD, I was from geography, but there are economists who have done PhD under him, there are population, transport, architect, that kind of people had also worked under him. And that was his vision. He had a very broad vision. His perspective, not only his understanding of geography was very deep, his understanding of the society and the overall Indian perspective and understanding this factor of unity and diversity which we are proud of in this country, this was part of his life. I have written something, but time here is very short. I will not narrate some of these interesting incidents. Then, from JNU, he became director of NUPA, what do you call National Institute of Education, Planning and Research, NUPA. He remained there, and from there he came back just before his retirement in JNU. That time retirement was 60 years. Just few days before his retirement, he was appointed Vice Chancellor of Delhi University. And he joined Delhi University and brought a number of changes even in Delhi University. And after his retirement, completing the tenure of Vice Chancellor, he became Chairman of Indian Council of Social Research. It was during this period of Indian Council of Social Research Chairperson that he fell ill. He, again let me share with you, Professor Raza, during his days of political activism, this party was banned and he had to go underground. And when he went underground, he lived in slums among very poor people, and there he contracted tuberculosis. Those days there was no treatment of tuberculosis in India. So he was sent to Europe for treatment, and he recovered to some extent. He came back, but after coming back, again he suffered from tuberculosis, and ultimately a large part of his one lung had to be removed. And he lived with that. Very active life, with lot of energy, and he was an ideal to all of us, because even when we were very young, and he could be more active than most of us who were young people. He gave lot of new things to the field of geography. Only one or two I will mention. One is that this idea, but we are talking about quantitative techniques or quantitative geography. This was a contribution of Moonis in India. That time, till 70s, in Europe, in USA, and some other countries, quantification had started entering into geography. But in India, most of us who were scared of mathematics, we opted for geography. But Professor Raza, who himself had absolutely no knowledge of quantitative techniques, he realized that if precision has to be brought, logic has to be applied in a concrete term in a field like geography, quantitative techniques are the most important. And that time there was nobody to teach quantitative techniques. Fortunately, we had one economist who was visiting JNU for 4 months from Sussex University. His name is Professor Gupta. Professor Raza asked him to design a course of quantitative techniques. He was an economist. He designed a course, and after a few months he had to leave. Then there was another person who was also economist, then Mr. Kundu, now Professor Kundu. He took over that. He tried to expand, and then to his help came Dr. Aslam Mahmood. So they designed. Then many of those people who learned those quantitative techniques, then it spread to all over. Today, every geography department in the country has somebody teaching quantitative techniques. That time in 70s, early 70s, nobody knew about quantitative techniques, and people were much away, and this is what precision was brought. And he was also open to many other ideas. You know, last word, I know the Sachin Sena said to take more than 5 minutes. Last thing which I like to mention, you know, you look at any research book, they say what, how and why. These three words are very important in research. What are you going to research? This is decided by your paradigm. And paradigm comes from your training, whatever is your discipline. How you do it, then you also decide some kind of methodology. And why particular phenomena is behaving in a particular fashion, that why is important, that you must know the reasoning. Not leave it just like this, that you saw some pattern and left it there. You must be able to understand that why it is behaving like this. So Professor Raza used to insist that the most important word out of these three is why, but in geography where is also important. He said what, how, where and why. These should be the four words. And he emphasized why explanation, and these many of these new techniques gave us, capacity to interpret why in a more meaningful way. So he was a great human being. He had great love for, people coming from the backward area, poor families, and it was his idea, along with some students, I was also part of that at that time, where JNU evolved a admission policy based on deprivation points. It was a very innovative thing. That time, those days, there was no reservation for SC, ST or OBC. But under deprivation point, there was an inbuilt mechanism that a person who is coming from SC, ST will get 9 points extra at the time of admission. If he is coming from very backward district, he will get 4 points extra. If he is coming very poor family, he will get 7 points extra. This is how he will. And another thing he used to emphasize, that JNU is not meant for Delhi. It is a national university, and this all India character must be reflected in the composition of its students and also in the composition of the faculty. And he saw to it that all kinds of teachers from all parts of the country, all scattered of the society, joined JNU and remember this Professor was not only a professor in CSRD, he was the first dean of students, he was the first rector of the university, and at all planning stages, Professor Raza was involved. He had even philosophy about each tree and each plant and each building which was there in the JNU. I was lucky that I spent maybe hundreds of evenings walking with him in the campus, and he will explain to me about the significance of a particular tree in a particular place, or a rock in a particular place, or a building and its design, and how, what does it convey in in the social framework. So that kind of imaginative person, and people used to say that he is one person who can speak even in the field of medical, forget about geography, even to the engineering students, even to economics students, sociology, you name, or even to physics, he could speak, and that was the kind of knowledge he had. And that is how he was trying to train all of us. Many of people sitting here have had a direct contact with Mr. Raza, and that is why I think one of the strengths that James was able to do very well in many fields was because of the philosophy which person like Moonis and some of his other senior colleagues helped in propagating. And he said, critical thinking is very important. You must question. And even your teacher, don't spare him, question him. Teacher should be, before entering the class, should be careful what he says. Otherwise, students should be able to question and catch him if he is not taking his teaching seriously. That is the kind of person, one about whom I can spend hours and hours and hours talking about it. And I will now, having just given a very brief introduction, I will request Professor D.K. to come and say.
Thank you, Professor. See, my teacher, I'm a little nervous. That's the reason that Professor Singh is the chair of today's evening. And am I audible? Hello? Yeah, I think I'm audible now. I'm really nervous to speak in front of my teacher and the chair of this evening's discussion, and my co-panelists, very eminent geographers present in front of me, and delegates who come from all parts of the country and the world, research scholars, students, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a great pleasure to speak in front of you about the person we are now discussing about, who not only is known to be a trendsetter in the country, but has been my teacher. That's more important. That is more important than the form. Few individuals leave an indelible mark on the academia and public policy as profoundly as Professor Moonis Raza, a scholar par excellence, whose vision and work continue to inspire generations. A pioneer in the fields of geography and planning, Professor Raza was instrumental in shaping the academic and institutional landscape in modern India. Towering personality as he was, it is difficult to dwarf his contribution to a single discipline only, or as an able administrator and academic planner, and too inconsequential to even talk about his contribution in transforming teaching and research in geography, and the tectonic shift that the discipline experienced during his lifetime, and even more after he was no more. His resoluteness to transform geography teaching and research stood test of time, and as a discipline, a new geography emerged on the ashes of the much fossilized tradition-ridden, uninspiring and moribund subject often derided as the cartographer of other social sciences and natural sciences, or dismissed as a school subject that helps locating a river or a mountain or states and their capitals. Whether or not, as students of geography, we said it or not, we always felt the lack of respect that our discipline received from those who pursued physics or economics, chemistry or history. The tectonic shift that I was referring to is his conviction that geography is essentially the social science and perhaps was designed to be so. He was a product of his time and had rich experience the tumultuous changes that had taken over the world due to wars, pestilence, poverty and exploitation, the marginalization of the nations and people under the weight of colonialism and imperialism, the relentless struggles by people to remove domination and authoritarian rule, racism and caste discriminations, the gender and the other inequalities of various kinds, the wounds of partition and the rise of majoritarian and communal tendencies threatening the integrity of nations, and above all, the urgent need to economically develop in the post-independent phase. He, as often I have heard him during his lectures, was uncomfortable to see his own discipline not respond to these tumultuous developments, transforming geographies as they were in any meaningful way, and pretending as if nothing has happened, and even if something has happened, it is none of its business. There are other subjects and disciplines which will take up these issues, and geography will relish in searching for a control line or a jet stream, map out land use of an area or urban morphology, or at best demarcate the slums in cities or places of unregulated, illegal occupancy, indulging in petty or major crimes, or even worse, suppliers of much needed cheap labor to industries and middle class households. He was wary of the incongruity in the lived experience and what the discipline taught to its unsuspecting students who took pride in neutrality, fact-based, empirical, unbiased, and precise representation of the earth to the last square inch. He was not the only one of his time who experienced the changes in the world, but very few were as uncomfortable as him with the incongruence between the subject and the existential issues. Sensitive as he was, Professor Raza blamed none, not even the tradition or fellow geographers with whom he must have had numerous discussions on these matters, but quietly brought a revolution to Indian geography by firmly placing this subject as a social science. Needless to mention, his leading position in the Center for the Study of Regional Development in Jawaharlal Nehru University in its formative period and the task of academic planning of the newly established university helped him achieve its objectives in a refreshingly unconventional, permissive and democratic ethos that he was himself the architect and was championing in the name of academic freedom. He received unflinching support from the first generation of geography faculty who joined him on this project of making geography as a social science. He was a visionary much ahead of his time. He had envisaged a new geography that will bring human beings to its rightful focus. It was relatively easy for him to usher in the desirable changes in the center of the study, where he could convince all his colleagues to reorient geography teaching and research, create a curriculum to reflect his ideas, and design relevant courses and modules that translate the vision of treating geography as a social science. But there was a world that existed beyond the confines of the center, located in the temporary building in the town campus of JNU, where he delivered mesmerizing lectures to successive batches of students who listened to him with rapt attention and heard him speak a new grammar of geography with awe and disbelief, which had very little to do with what they had learned in their formative undergraduate days. They still learned land use, but were told how important was land tenures and land relations were to cropping pattern and agricultural production. They still discussed population distribution, but were told environmental factors have little role to play in redistribution of population. They learned about monsoons, but were introduced to how this yearly cycle of rainfall also created problems of plenty and scarcity of water, forcing people to fend for themselves from flood, havoc, or digging wells of hundreds of feet from the ground. They studied earthquakes, but also came to know that the devastations caused by it are disproportionately endured by the poor and the vulnerable. The changes had a far-reaching influence on the students. Professor Ezazuddin Ahmad, in one of his tributes paid to Professor Raza, said that he has no hesitation describing the changes brought about in this process as belonging to Moonisian school. The world outside did not take these changes kindly. Many were skeptical, some dismissive, while some others were unconcerned. These kinds of learning were contemptuously described as non-geographical and outlandish. Professor Raza took all the criticism on his stride and continued with even greater vigor by incorporating more social theories that would explain geographical phenomena. Professor Raza's contributions in elevating geography as a social science were deeply transformative, marked by his intellectual rigor and his ability to define his discipline's boundaries, transcending the conventional binaries of geography into physical and human, or regional and systematic. He integrated all into the broader framework of social sciences that enabled the students trained as such to talk to the other social scientists on equal footing and with equal terms. Professor Raza was simultaneously a romanticist and a humanist, and his treating of geography as a social science was founded on these epistemologies. His romanticism echoed a Humboldtian view of the cosmos, and his humanism was rooted in the worldviews of the medieval Sufi poets like Amir Khosrow or Sant Kabir. Iqbal's poems on man-nature relationship influenced him so much that he would often quote a couplet or two to explain his idea of the relationship between man and nature while lecturing on the topic to the students of postgraduate classes. To him, the man-nature dichotomy was as much false as it was naive. Man and nature is a false proposition. Man in nature, or at best of nature, was his dictum. In his own words, rationality of man is as much natural as or rationality of monsoon winds, the Cenozoan or the xerophytes. Further, he goes on, while the social sciences cannot come up to terms with animality of man, the natural sciences cannot come to terms with his humanity. In such a serious crisis of knowledge, geography has a modest but significant role to play. To Raza, the basic premise of geography is the unity of all that objectively exists. Geography denies the validity of taxonomic knowledge, wherein the categories of the first order are natural and the social sciences. To the extent that a body of knowledge qualifies to be a science at all, it is both natural and social, for it studies the cause and effect complexes which transcends these distinctions. I cannot resist the temptation to quote one of his most favorite lines from Iqbal's Man-God dialogue that summarizes his views about the relation between man and environment. Roughly translated, it says into English, it says, "You created the night, I made the lamp to light it. You created the cake, I made the cup to hold wine. You created the wilderness, the deserts and mountains. I made the gardens, the rose beds, the avenues. I am the one who took a stone and made a mirror out of it. I am that who transformed poison into nectar. According to him, the work of the geographer is contingent upon the recognition of the unity of the material world through the mechanism of interactions between social man and nature. The essentiality of man and nature is based on man as a natural being and nature as a human reality. He further goes on to say, since the naturalization of man and humanization of nature proceed simultaneously, through man's interaction with nature, human history may be viewed as a continuum, should be viewed as a continuation of and a qualitatively new stage in natural history, the two constituting a differential unity.
Please conclude.
It is that the primeval nature is prior to man and continue to exist without him everywhere, except on the microdot of a planet in the vastness of the universe. This non-humanized nature, which has not naturalized man, is of only little relevance to the geographer. Nature comes within the orbit of geography primarily as a constituent element of social practice. Nothing explains Moonisian school of placing geography as a social science better than these sentences. I could go on and on. I know Professor Singh is a very strict teacher and I am a very obedient student. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm giving English because I'm getting so much that he would like to be. My request is the speaker of the senior. My request is that I lifted your I said, do you hear me now? My request is that all the speakers are very senior members that they should restrict themselves to 10 minutes or even shorter because time is very limited. We started very late. Now, my next request is to Professor Safra Alam, who will be joining us online. Please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself, Safra. We can't hear you. Please unmute.
No, it's not coming. What is the problem? Meanwhile, we can have another. You can start now.
Can I start?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead. Now we can hear you.
Can I start, sir? Am I?
Sure. Please go ahead. Please start, Safra. We can hear you now.
Your voice is not clear. I am not getting any signal. What should I do? I am sorry.
I said, please, you can start speaking. Now we can hear you.
Your voice is clear. Please start.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And please confine yourself to 10 minutes.
So, thank you very much Chairperson, and good evening, everybody. So I'm going to make my presentation on the topic of Moonis Raza and his idea of India. I will start my presentation by posing a question. What is the idea of India? And I'm posing this question to Professor Moonis Raza. Unfortunately, I have not seen him, I have not met him, I have not attended his lecture. So in a way, I'm not his student. But I have been a student of his students, and I have been associated with the center that he has founded. And I have of late very closely followed the writings of Professor Moonis Raza, both his geographical writings as well as non-geographical writings. Particularly, I am interested in non-geographical writings, and those writings are very important when we discuss his idea of India. And while discussing about his idea of India, I propose 7 aspects of his thinking that would clearly reflect on what kind of India he wanted to build. So the first point is that the idea of India, the idea of his India, was shaped because of his attraction to Marxism in his childhood, in his school days, and subsequently his involvement in anti-colonial struggle, both physically as well as intellectually. And because of his exposure to Marxism, and also because of his exposure to activism, he developed a strong political critique of imperialism. And now all of you know that the first thing that he vehemently criticized the British colonial economic policy. So according to him, the British colonial policy distorted the existing economic space of India. The geographical core of India, which was very rich in resources, which was inhabited by people belonging to the marginalized, one of the oldest people in the form of tribes. This geographical core became periphery, economic periphery. On the other hand, the geographical periphery became the economic core in the colonial time. Port-based development led to the exploitation and marginalization of the geographical core. The second important critique was that the British played a shrewd game of dividing communities, and both caste and communities, by using various means. And the third is that British were also responsible for creating many political problems that crop up after the independence of the country, particularly problems related to, partition of Bengal on the basis of religious line, and then the issue of Kashmir, and many other challenges that we inherited was because of colonial rule. And lastly, he also politically reacted to the explanation offered by the Britishers for the backwardness of developing countries, particularly of India. And according to the British or colonial mode of explanation, India was developed because of overpopulation and lack of resources or adverse climate. Moonis proposed that India was not an overpopulated country because at that time, he was writing in 1950s, vast tract of land is yet to be brought under cultivation. And the major cause for the problems of India was because of the plundering of resources by the British during the colonial time. And this exploitation was across all social castes and categories. So the first important idea of India, according to Professor Moonis, was that the entire country, irrespective of caste, irrespective of religion, had to unite against the British because always suffers in some way or the other. The second idea that I would like to throw light on is that is consistent stance against communal forces, both minority communalism and majority communalism. Here I would like to read a few lines from his writings. He says, communalism of hues and colors, both majority communalism as Shaunism and minority communalism as separatism, has been eating into the very vitals of subcontinental India since the days of British rule. The imperialist power injected this deadly virus into the Indian organism as a crucial element of its divide and rule policy. While the British rulers were forced to quit India, the dark shadow of their policy of divide and rule persisted and continued to darken many important aspects of today's life. And his prophecy is told to even in 2024, this issue of communalism and community-based polarization is persisting. So he foresaw an important change of nation building. And the third important point that I not going to already Moonis is that he was very much disturbed with the prevalence of conservatism among the Muslim community. And according to him, a progressive nation cannot be built, can be only built when there are progressive communities, whether they are minority community or majority community. And since in the student days, he tried to bring Muslim community near progressive politics through left movement. And during his activism days at Kanpur, he played a very, very important role in mobilizing the Muslim masses. So he was a very, very intelligent mobilizer who knew the psychology of his audience very well. To the Muslim, he would say that the whole aim of communism was to give people food and shelter so that they may give time to prayer without any worldly care. And in this connection, he would employ the saying of Shah Waliullah, a very famous Sufi saint from Delhi. I am reading his couplet. एक तरफ जन्नत की तरबें मुझे अपनी ओर खींचती हैं, दूसरी तरफ दुनिया की चिंताएं मुझे जमीन पर दफन करती हैं. I will translate it as, on the one hand, the demands of the heaven puts me. On the other hand, fears of the world bury me under the ground. And so that Professor Moonis was very much against the idea, against the prevalence of conservatism among Muslim community. And he was against triple talaq, and during the Shah Banu case, he was one of the petitioners who supported Shah Banu in the Supreme Court. And the fourth idea that I would like to discuss here is that his idea for India. And since early days, since his days of participation in the working class movement, we should remember that he was a person who lived with the workers and for many months and years. And he was for the dignity of labor and against the exploitation of labor of all kinds. And his love for the dignity of labor can be amply justified by the fact that he was living in the same jhukki and jhoppi where laborers were living. And he was also of the opinion that every community should have equal rights on the resources of the country. And in particular, he had little soft corner and rightly so for the marginalized community, particularly the tribals. And as I told you, we're in the center of the country, geographical core of the country. They were sitting on largest reserves of minerals and forest resources, but they are economically on the periphery. And similarly, he was deeply concerned about the place of Muslims in the India's trajectory of development and the development of India in relation to the development of Indian Muslims. So in this connection, I would like to again read a few lines from his writings. Well, this is probably his last writing that was published in Economic and Political Weekly in 1993. Since development is indivisible, the living conditions of a large majority of Indian Muslims, steeped in deep misery and degradation, are a drag on the progress of the country as a whole, and create serious obstacles in the difficult part of national. Yes, sir.
Please conclude, please.
Okay, I'll conclude. Okay, the destiny of Indian Muslims, in this sense, is an integral component of destiny of India. And the destiny of India is irrevocably linked with the destiny of Indian Muslims. And fifthly, he was for his Moonis had an idea of India as a land of unity and diversity. So according to him, diversities have evolved over millennia and pursue the basic material of which Indian nation is made. And unity and diversity are not opposite, which can go at each other's cost. They are symbolically linked, support and sustain each other. Any attempt to overemphasize either of these would disturb the delicate balance. And then he also says diversity is really good, but disparity is not. And particularly, if the disparity is built on diversity, that means if a particular group with particular social identity remains backward, then there is every chance of successful nation building. And finally, I would like to say that Moonis Raza's ideas of India can also be seen in the kind of institution that he tried to build. And I'll take examples of two institutions. One is when he was at Aligarh Muslim University in 1960s, he was the founder director of general education. And this center was created to impart science education among the students and also among the masses. And a nation cannot be built just by creating physical infrastructure. It can only be built when the citizens have a scientific temple, a scientific approach or view of the life and the society. So the whole task of this general education, as it was developed by Moonis Raza, was to build a citizenship which is rational in outlook and which has a scientific temple. And finally, Jawaharlal Nehru University that he was one of the key persons in foundation of this university. And the very idea of the university that he had in his mind and the idea of the university that he utilized in the form of Jawaharlal Nehru. I'm not ready. Just half a minute.
Please conclude.
So, this is clearly visible. The university is a need not only for providing education, it is also a space through which we can bring progressive social transformation. It is also a space where the marginalized section of population, both geographically and socially, can come and study and participate in the nation and society building project. So with these words, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much, sir.
Hello. Now, let me again request that please try to be brief. May I now request Further Abdul Shahban, who is the next speaker.
Thank you, sir, for this opportunity. I'm very grateful that going to talk on somebody about whom I know more from my teachers, because when I interacted with them for almost last 2 days, there has been constant discussion on him. And also when we joined, Prof was there. At the time he was in the hospital and we could not see, only we could see his office. But we hear about him with senior colleagues and honorable teachers. What I'm going to, very briefly talk about, that somebody who was not a philosopher but also economist. And this is the idea I'm posing very strongly. Because at one side, like Tobler, you can say that everything is related to everything else, but the nearer things are more related. Similarly, he will talk about that the ratio between known and that known to be unknown remain always constant. And that's what actually we find ourselves. As such, it is a philosopher and actually deals with it. But more importantly, what I'm coming to is actually with his idea that how we relate to some of the strong things, and particularly on the trade. I looked at his book and read it, and very profound book, sometimes all of you try to read it, the Transport Geography. Community flows and regional structural economy of India. It is comprised of 3 sections. And the first one is the database methodology, 5 chapters. Community flows is actually 7 chapters. And then again, community flows and regional structures is about 6 chapters that what we are talking about. Simply putting together, there are 3 basic ideas which it gives us. First thing, looking from the internal trade. All of us are aware about the Ricardian theory of the trade and the comparative advantage. Then, larger mathematical model which Hexter and Oli brought in, that how general equilibrium can be created. But here actually, Professor Raza talks about that how the internal trade can emerge from the different kind of cost of the transport, and that what actually he brings out in the whole process. The next one, the first idea what he puts together. It is very important for us as economic geographers to look into this. The first idea he puts it that why trade emerges. Trade emerges, perhaps explains more than what actually Ricardo will explain at some point. That in internal economy or actually in the international trade, the trade is basically result of the immobility of the factor of production. Some factor of productions are not able to move, and that becomes the crucial for us to understand that why it is emerging. And this remains a crucial factor. And but he also says that difference in absolute prices and transport cost can be crucial again in this. I am coming one by one to this. Second thing, what he says, how regional structure get modified. What he says that with growth and development, the interaction between the settlement states and the transformation of the settlement hierarchy takes place. And that quality comes and explains very vigorously, and I think that more than what actually any trade theory will explain on this, and particularly an internal trade. And that part he says, and this say, interaction becomes very crucial in the whole process, and this hierarchy gets modified.
and he explains on that. Now, in this whole process, next he comes to act on very important part that how the trade will happen. If these different type of settlements are interacting, what kind of process will emerge? He says there will be, if you can show the next slide, he says that because it is a complex idea, which actually I thought to break it down and show you. He says that the three part of this whole process can emerge out of this. And it is crucial as a geographer to understand this. What he says there will be downward movement. This downward, the downward movement, downward movement will emerge because of the higher order field which actually can export the manufactured good to the downward, and that what actually called downward movement. Second process is outlines, upward movement, where the lower order basically supply the raw material to the towns, and then he says more complex form is that lateral movement. In the lateral movements, he actually outlines that how what actually he says interchange are actually the intermediate good and final goods. The intermediate goods and final goods, semi-produced material are actually like steel or actually many other things. They will exchange between the equal hierarchical size, and that is actually, I think, the more crucial part in the whole theory. Now, very important part actually he brings out here into that why regional inequality will emerge. Very important part again he talks about, and he says because it may be policy bias towards the freight rate. The freight rate, the way the freight rate will price may be resulting ultimately in unequal trade or actually unfavorable trade to some region over the other regions, and they are the really genesis, they create genesis of the whole process of inequality, and that may have emerged. And finally I come, because of the lack of time, he says because of the interaction of the different kind of hierarchy and actually this trade process and freight rate. And another very important point which he brings out, but Alfred Weber theory perhaps we have all read. Alfred Weber will talk about that how the transportation cost will be proportional to the distance, and that part he brings out very well. Now, Raza will talk, Professor Raza will talk, Moonis Raza will talk that how the telescopic reduction may happen, and that telescopic reduction may create a tapering. That policy may create a tapering towards certain spaces, and that part he actually brings out, and the way the freight rate are priced will favor one region or other region, and how this process will unfold. That actually in the next slide actually we look at how what he says that if you price outcome of the cross subsidization in freight policy in favor of low price goods, if the low price commodities are done, then what will happen out of this, very quickly I am coming, that discrimination in favor of low price commodity
Please conclude.
will result into the low price commodity moves longer distance as compared to the high price good like manufactured good, then is offsetting of the friction of distance that in turn offsets the location of the activities, and ultimately if the low price goods are actually done, created low tariff goes in favor of the towns. So that what actually says that whatever subsidies we are asking in tariff for the raw material ultimately results in the regional distortion in favor of the towns, and opposite of this can be in favor of the rural, and that I think is a very enormous contribution from his side. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm aware of the fact, being a teacher, that we can't stop in before 45 minutes, but please be brief. May I now request Professor Abhi.
I owe a great deal to Professor Moonis Raza. He was a great humanist, and I could encounter in my first day when I appeared for the admission interview. He asked very comfortable question, and the way he judged me coming from rural area, he asked me questions in Hindi, and very rudimentary question related to agriculture. I was very comfortable. Then I have also opportunity to study one of the papers taught by Professor Moonis Raza, that was Geography of Education. So that class was being held in Nepal, and sometimes buses were not available, so we walked down from JNU campus to Nepal. I was walking on the road, and from the behind, somebody stopped the car. In the car, Professor Moonis Raza was there, and he asked me to get into the car. And then he took me, and then there was a class. So I will not talk about education. I give it to Professor Sinha to talk about education. I will talk about something of urbanization, regional development, and issues related with migration. So now it is an accepted fact that India was a prosperous country at the beginning of 18th century. But also it is a fact that hardly any regional disparity was there before 18th century. So how did regional disparity came into existence? So Moonis Raza at that time, when the other pioneering work has been published in the 1960s by Gunan Medal and Andre Bundar. He also tried to develop theory, that is colonial theory of urbanization, to explain the regional disparity in India. Honorable Chairman has already explained the colonial cities in the Himalayas, but the main thing was that three important colonial cities, the largest city of India, Mumbai, now Chennai, and Calcutta. These cities are not the ancient cities of India, not the medieval cities of India, but these are the colonial cities planted by the British. And this is from this process of this colonial urbanization, regional disparity has started. How did it start? And Moonis Raza calls it that this city had worked as suction machines, siphoning out the resources. I remember this word, suction machine. And how it is being linked with what is happening in our economy. In the economy, at that time, Calcutta was made capital in 1772. And 1793 there was a permanent settlement in Bengal. So permanent settlement was the type of extracting rents from the farmers, from the tenants, and then it is going to the British East India Company. It was an example, if I use the word accumulation by disposition. Then the primary goods were supplied from here, and the finished goods were brought, and this has destroyed our indigenous industries, cottage, handicraft industry. And since peasants have been uprooted from farm and then the industry has been destroyed, we have a migration started from northern India, from the Gangetic Valley, first to Calcutta, and these were the coolie migration. And then in British Empire, slavery was abolished in 1833, and indentured labor started from this country, from 1833 to onwards. And this indentured labor, we can relate how our father of the nation in 1893 went to South Africa to fight a case of a Gujarati merchant, he was Dada Abdullah. But then he found there the indentured labor was in very bad condition, and he fought for the
rights of these migrant people and stayed there for 20 years before coming to India in 1950. There he actually evolved the tools of non-violence, civil disobedience, subject. So why I am saying this process of urbanization, migration, and uprooting the people from their places created a type of history where one need to look into. Then these two processes, accumulation by disposition and then the primary goods exchange with the finished goods, this led to the unequal exchange. So these are various mechanisms that led to the regional disparity of India. And the pioneering work of Professor Raza and Bandyopadhyay was published in Indian Journal of Regional Science. The title of the paper, I think this is pioneer work, and it is the beginning, I think I say this is very fundamental work to understand regional disparity of India. The title was Regional Development in India, an Analytical Framework and Indicators. I think everybody is, I like to advise that everybody should read it. Now this was happening in the field of urbanization and economic development in India, which he called dysfunctional urbanization, urban atrophy. These are the words used by him, I have listened. Dysfunctional urbanization, atrophy. And his legacy has been taken by two of my teachers, Professor Atiya Hakim and Professor Kundu, who further worked on colonial urbanization and measurement of urban processes. So let me tell you a little bit more about the process of urbanization as a tribute to Professor Raza. So when we have a dysfunctional urbanization in India, what was the functional urbanization that is happening in the Western country? So the resources that is flowing from India and elsewhere from the colonies, it was boosting urbanization, creating and the growth of the cities, not only in Great Britain but other colonial countries, France, Italy, Spain, etc. There was massive rural to urban migration in 18th and 19th century in Europe. Migration was to such an extent the villages disappeared. If villages disappeared, there was no rural, no agriculture was there, but not the agrarian crisis that we observe here, where still our 65% population live in rural. And then they have the opportunity of emigration. Now, how the city system was developed? This was the urbanization, this was the capitalism that was growing. This capitalism was shaping the not only level of urbanization but the urban system, which we call rent size rule, that it has come as in the form of rent size rule. Now rent size rule,
Please conclude.
rent size rule has been given by C.K. Jeep, and he was not a geographer, he was a philologist and linguist. And it is some sort of inequality that is inbuilt in that. So in conclusion, I will say that urbanization is a force that creates inequality. But urbanization creates wealth, resources. It is alternative urbanization and inclusive urbanization that can save the future. If urbanization is a challenge, there is the opportunity also, but how to save? So from Moonis Raza to I will mention APJ Abdul Kalam, who has given the idea of Pura, providing urban amenities to the rural area. So urbanization can become a vehicle of rural development if the model of urbanization, Pura model, is followed for the development of the rural community and rural area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for excellent presentation.
I am tempted to take 2 lines for
Please.
Please.
2 lines.
Yes.
Friends, I was not the student of Professor Moonis Raza. My association with Professor Moonis Raza from 1975 to 1992. And my last meeting with Professor Raza in hospital when he was ill, and I just went here to meet him and get his blessings, because I was the convener of 14th Indian Geography Congress at Jaipur. At that time he was very ill. So in honor of Professor Moonis Raza, and just to give tribute to him, and he led a fakirana life. मस्ती से जीना उनकी आदत थी. तो उसी के लिए मैं कहना चाहता हूँ कि फकीराना आए सदाकत चले, फकीराना आए सदाकत चले, खुश रहो मियाँ हम दुआ करते रहे. तो उन्होंने खुशी देखी.
Thank you, Chair. Am I audible? Yeah. My job is twofold. One is that I'll concentrate on what Professor Raza did insofar as educational or the whole exercise on educational development is concerned, particularly within the field of geography, how we brought in education as a theme that one could work on. And I think, there has been, at least if I were to perhaps look at as to what has been the nature of publications the last 2 decades, almost every second journal has an article which in fact, the frequency at which, educational disparities, literacy rates, access to education and all other themes are being talked about. I think the credit goes to Professor Moonis Raza, who in fact did the pioneering work in this particular area, and I'll give you some basic idea about what he did. My thesis itself was on educational development, so I was the first recipient of that idea. The second is, of course, to thank my fellow panelists who have put in enormous amount of work, because when we decided, I would like also to thank IIG, when we decided to hold the Centenary birth celebration from today. There will be a series of activities which we are planning in the next 1 year, and this is the beginning, and therefore we have suddenly begun with a very emphatic note on Professor Raza's work. We did not talk much about Professor Raza as a person, we talked about his work, and I think each one of my panelists have really done a fair bit of work, research on what he really did. There are two important points which I would like to take up before I go on to educational development. One is that the context of the transport development, not only in terms of network but in terms of commodity flows, in terms of the variety of aspects that Professor Raza, and that was a pioneering work. I would rather posit a question as to do we really study that in our geography curriculum, either in economics or in transport geography. We should ask ourselves, because that's one work which really tells you as to how goods and commodities move from one part of the country to another part of the country, and so on and so forth. So that's something which we really, and that's an analytical framework which we geographers have completely forgotten. The work was published in 1986, 87, although the earlier version of the work is still earlier. The second important work, which Professor Bhagat and Professor Shaban talked about, is about the colonial structure of urbanization, colonial structure of regional development. We should try to take a look at that structure and re-work on the theme or the propositions which Professor Raza has talked about. Because it seems, to my mind, because I did a small exercise in the context of northeastern India, which is published by, in one of the journals of the northeastern India, published from Guwahati, in the recent volumes. where I see that we are making a return to a similar kind of a structure within the neoliberal framework. So what Sarfraz was talking about, the idea of India, and the kind of propositions that he talked about, what Professor Bhagat talked about in the context of urbanization and migration, and spurious urbanization, the question of how spatial linkages are established and how suction mechanism works through the port cities during the colonial times, and then looking at the question of education and educational disparities in this country, particularly at the time when 2020 national education policy is being very actively implemented, will make a lot of sense. And in this context, I would say that we need to take a look at the work which Professor Raza and Professor Ahmed did, which is called the School Education in India, which was published in 1989. It's a voluminous work with nearly about, it's an atlas of school education in India. And that's something which no geography department really takes note of. That's an exercise where three important things were talked about. In fact, it gives you a fairly good amount of list of indicators, scientifically arriving at, through a kind of framework of theoretical input, as to how do we really understand educational disparities in the Indian context. So it's not just educational disparities in the spatial context, but also educational disparities in the social context. And therefore, there is a famous triangle that that has been reproduced in several works, but not in geographical works. I mean, that's the poverty of Indian geography. But people who have been working outside, in sociology, it is a remarkable diagram which he has presented, where he looks at as to where is the burden of illiteracy, who really bears the burden of illiteracy, and there you see the regional and the social mix of burden of illiteracy at the bottom of it. When you superimpose it through the process of what is the dominant class and who really benefits from what kind of education, then you really see as to what is really happening. And this was done through the kind of data analysis which was produced by Government of India through All India Education Survey. So it is 4th and the 5th All India Education Survey results, which in fact was analyzed by him. Even NCRT, which was producing this data, never bothered to make use of it. And this is for the first time that we have a situation in 1989 where, you can imagine, 47 to 1989, we have this data from 1952 to 89. And yet, we have a situation, give me 2 minutes, sir, I'm going to be just done with this, that where we find a district level analysis of access to education, access to primary education, access to upper primary education, access to secondary and higher secondary education, access not only understood in terms of distance, but access understood in terms of travel time, access understood in terms of where the school is located. Catchment areas of the schools were worked out. Such a massive, I don't think we have introduced that kind of a work even at a smaller scale, but that was done at the national level. Working out the catchment areas of the schools where children are going to which school. And this is something which was so informative for us to in fact develop some kind of theoretical framework. I wish the policy makers in India who in fact are the architects of the National Education Policy 2020 would take a look at that document and understand as to what they really are trying to propose. So therefore, we need to evaluate the new education policy 2020 in the light of the propositions which in fact are valid today, even more valid today than they were in 1989. Why I'm saying this? because then the national policy was to ensure access to almost every household, every child, and in every habitation. One of the distinct features of the National Education Survey was that it was not the village which was the unit of data collection, it was the habitation. So we have only 5 lakh to 6 lakh villages in this country, revenue units, but nearly about 13 lakh habitations. One habitation, a village may consist of a Brahman tola here and a Thakur tola there and another tola somewhere else. So a cluster of, so any two cluster which was physically separated by a factor of half a kilometer, was considered as an independent cluster. And these clusters were important because of social stigma to movement, caste-based social stigma pertaining to movement. The low caste person would hardly dare to enroll their children even in independent India, in a Brahmin school located in the Brahmin locality. So that ethos, which was there, not only ethos but a policy of the government of India to take primary school to every habitation. And the result was that by the 7th All India Education Survey, we had 96% of habitations having primary schools. But what is this NEP trying to say today? NEP is trying to say we must close down the schools because the schools have become uneconomical. They are not only uneconomical, but they are saying that it has become less productive academically. And they create a kind of a jargon base which has no basis in any kind of a research. That an academic process takes place in a much more vibrant manner when you have a larger setup of the schools. So today the situation is, according to the Government of India data, and they have not published the 22 data, 23 data, and 24 data, let me tell you this, and there is no census which has happened so far for whatever reason that you may feel like justifying, but the actual situation is that there has been a gross reduction in the number of primary schools in the country. In Jharkhand alone, there have been 47,000 primary schools closed down. 58,000 schools have been closed down in the last 3 years in Maharashtra. In Rajasthan, there has been a fairly good amount of schools that are closing down. So therefore, the relationship between access, which is a geographical proposition, and educational, whatever we are really trying to see in terms of advantage of education, because education is a big game changer. And national education policy is an attack on the mobility, the social and the economic mobility that the national education, that the early education system was in a position to bring about. In new education, national education policy 2020 is really trying to create a situation where education will be meant only for a handful of people, the rest will be there in the open market, being sold as slaves. So therefore, we need to really re-examine the current educational policy in the light of the work which was done by Professor Ahmed and his team under the UNESCO project. And I'm proud that it's developed, the idea developed in the Center for the Study of Regional Development through a kind of a workshop which we used to call the Social Geography Laboratory. So that was the first laboratory in geography which had no lab but only mind to work on and data to struggle with. Thank you very much for this. But before I do that, I would like to thank all my fellow colleagues because I have taken the initiative on behalf of the IIG, and also I would like to thank our chair. So I'm proposing, in order to cut short the kind of people must be hungry and they must be waiting for the cultural program. So I would like to thank the chair, and I would like to thank my fellow colleagues for doing such a wonderful job. And I believe this will grow into a good paper. And thank you all for giving us a patient hearing. And thank you for being part of the first centenary birth celebration of Prof. Moonis Raza. Thank you very much.
Thank you. you very much, Professor Sinha. And for me, this whole session was very nostalgic because I've gone through that life where all these things were being discussed. So I'm grateful to all the 5 speakers. They have put it very efficiently some of the ideas for which Mr. Raza lived and for which Mr. Raza died. And this is his contribution in the field of geography and also in the field of various other spheres of life can always be remembered, and he will always also be remembered as a great human being. And that is above and all above he being a great scholar and a great teacher, he was an excellent and superb human being. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the organizing committee, I thank the chair, Professor Ranjit Singh ji, and the speakers, honorable speakers, Professor G.K. Naik, Professor Abdul Shaban, Professor Rambabu Bhagat, Professor Sarfaraj Alam, and Professor Sachidanand Sinha ji. And we feel proud that we have witnessed the first Moonis Raja Memorial Session. So this will be also recorded in the history of Moonis Raja Memorial Celebration. Thank you very much. Centenary celebration. Thank you. We are shortly, very quickly, we are starting this cultural video program of Northeast India. Please, we hope that you will enjoy it. We have collected it from the Don Bosco, and they have covered most of the states of Northeast India. So please be patient, and I would request our Marius Mingra to start the program immediately. Marius.